The video streaming war heating up. CNBC parent Comcast throwing its hat in the ring with the announcement of its own streaming service, Peacock, set to debut in April, which will have exclusive rights to Parks and Recreation and The Office.
This comes as HBO Max strikes a deal to stream the hit series The Big Bang Theory, and Netflix lands the rights to Seinfeld. Joining us in a first on CNBC interview, Marc Randolph, Netflix co-founder. He was also the company's first CEO. He's out with a new memoir, That Will Never Work: The Birth of Netflix and the Amazing Life of an Idea. Reminds me of Shoe Dog, actually. It's a really good read and some amazing anecdotes. But first, on the news of the day, Marc, how much room is there for all of these streamers?
Well, I hope there's a lot of room for people. I mean, as a consumer of television and movies, I love what's happening. I mean, I certainly don't only watch Netflix. I enjoy the fact there's multiple companies producing content. I think it's great for consumers.
Clearly, we're saying the word streamer there because that's what Netflix and many others have evolved to. When you founded the company, it was sending DVDs via post. To what extent did you get lucky that the market evolved and allowed you to disrupt quicker? Or to what extent did you foresee that would happen?
So That'll Never Work is really about these first crucial years at Netflix, when it was, in fact, sending DVDs through the mail. But we knew from day one that eventually you'd be downloading movies or streaming movies. And the trick was, how do you build a business that will keep you sustained until that moment comes? And it took more than 10 years of sending DVDs through the mail before streaming finally arrived.
Did you know back then or project ahead that not only would you be streaming things, but that you'd have to be producing the original content? Because that, to me, is the big bet now, obviously, that everyone is laying.
Well, certainly that's become a huge part of what Netflix and the other streamers are doing. But quite frankly, on day one, that was the furthest thing from our mind. We were trying to keep our website from crashing. Right. We were trying to figure out how do we possibly get someone to rent a...
And avoiding late fees was the business, essentially.
Well, it certainly helps when you have a large $8 billion market and the entrenched competitor is, let's say, leaves an experience that can be improved upon.
Right.
So is that true, really, that it was founded on frustration with Blockbuster?
Yeah, Blockbuster had a term, they called it managed dissatisfaction. And if you're going to enter a market, you love to go against a competitor whose principle is managed dissatisfaction.
So, as Sarah mentioned in the intro, you were the first CEO.
Yes.
Reed Hastings, your co-founder, of course, the CEO now and for most of the years of the company's history. How did it transition, and was there a big clash between the two of you?
There wasn't a clash. It actually happened. There was one night I was working late, and the door cracks open, and Reed sticks his head in and then delivers those words that we've all heard, which is, we've got to talk. And get down to it, he was concerned with my leadership. We had just tried to raise our Series B. It hadn't gone quite so well. And his concern was that if there was smoke at this level, there'd be fire later. And he wasn't proposing to can me. He said we should run the company together. But I had this dream of starting and running my own company, and it required me to say, wow, what's more important? The success of the company or having me be the guy running it? And ultimately, I decided having Reed join would be a great thing. And certainly looking back now, wow, that was probably the smartest decision I ever made.
Do you still get on with him now, or did that create a sort of animosity between the two?
No, Reed and I went from that moment of sharing responsibility at the company. In some ways, that was a renaissance for Netflix. That's where we found the business model that worked. That's where we came up with the personalization technology. And Reed and I are not only great partners, we're still good friends.
Well, the stock is, it's now a $130 billion company. Back to the sort of story of today, everybody's chasing Netflix. It was the first mover, but all the big content players and cable companies are all trying to go after. Do you think Netflix faces some real existential threats as they pull some of their content from the sites?
So I haven't worked for the company for 16 years, so I'm not a good person to comment on their current strategies or their current tactics. The thing I'm perhaps qualified to talk about is their culture, because that Netflix culture springs from how Reed and I treated each other, how we treated our employees. And from the very beginning, there's been two important things. It's always been about the customer, and it's always been about pushing responsibility down lower in the organization and empowering people to make decisions, which enables a company to not only move fast, but to always be willing to leave behind the past to embrace the future. So I don't know what Netflix has up its sleeve, but I know culturally it is extremely well situated to do a great job in these coming years.
Do you still hold the stock now?
I do for, I'd say, sentimental reasons, but it certainly has been performing pretty well economically as well.
Gus, you're happy you didn't sell it to Jeff Bezos for $14 million.
I
that
certainly
was quite
am.
a story.
Yeah, we went up to Seattle to hear what he had to say, and in one way it was validating.
This was, a year into the company?
Oh, yeah, this was 2 or 3 months after launch.
Wow.
But what it ended up being is not just a turn-down acquisition, but this almost commitment ceremony for Reed and I, where we had to look each other in the eye and say, we can get out now if we want, or do we go for it? And thank goodness we went for it.
To ask one of Mike's questions in a slightly different way, of course, to begin with, whether it was going to be via DVD or streamers, you were a distributor of content, and clearly now Netflix is very much a creator of content. Does it worry you when you look at the company how much they're spending on that, where the company is in its life cycle? It's been running for 20 years, and the fact that it's not profitable?
So I'm not worried because I think Netflix is looking forward. They're not acquiring content on today's audience, they're acquiring content on the future audience. And you always are going to look back and say, wow, what a deal. I mean, for example, if you look what Hulu was paying for Seinfeld, that was a lot of money. But wow, what Netflix is probably paying for Seinfeld is even more. But if you look back even further to those very first deals, I think Netflix got the entire Starz catalog for $1 million. I mean, looking back, you go, wow, that was nothing. And it's because it's scaled. We have more and more and more subscribers over a fixed acquisition.
You talk about your kind of attachment to the early days of Netflix, and I know you've operated sort of in the startup space and tried to mentor other entrepreneurs and things like that. Is it sobering to you that right now the industry that Netflix is playing in is essentially all about the Netflix against the incumbent giants? There isn't another startup out there that's saying we're going to revolutionize this thing.
I talked about the culture being so important. And when we were small, and I talked about this in the book, when we had 7 people, you don't have time to control people. You say, we're going over there, and I'll meet you there, figure out how to do it. And you can do that when you have 7 people, and you can do it when you have 70. And when you have 700, it gets hard. And when you have 7,000, it gets really hard. And Netflix is one of the few companies of scale that still thinks like a startup. And so they don't believe they're the entrenched player. They always believe they're the startup, and they're going to behave like that.
Can you build a Netflix in today's environment?
Well, wow, I have no idea.
I'm just wondering if the startup sort of culture and environment is as ripe as it was back for you in the 90s.
More so. I'm extremely excited. In fact, one of the reasons I've written this book was to tell people that all these tips and tricks and secrets that I learned over 40 years are applicable even more so now, and not just for startups, for anybody with an idea. When we did Netflix, we had to spend 6 months and $1 million just building a simple e-commerce website. So testing that idea took time and money. The exact same thing could happen today in a couple of hours for a couple of $100.
In all sectors or just in media?
In all sectors. And so one of the things I say is that nobody knows anything. No one knows where this next movement's going to come from. And the people who are going to take Netflix down may not even be in business yet. But Netflix realizes that. But I'm extremely excited about innovation in the future. I think we're just getting started.
What's your favorite Netflix show?
Now, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a Luddite and that I'm still months behind. I mean, we're just finishing Narcos.
Oh,
but, yeah,
Narcos and Ozarks, I read, I think.
Yes.
Were 2 favorites.
Another one of my favorites, you know.